them unto the fulfilling of his covenant. That's Mormon 5:14. So you see, this idea here is very interesting. The Jewish covenant in the Book of Mormon is eternal and thus unconditional in the respect that it will not be taken away. Yet it applies to each Jew conditionally, based upon individual righteousness. Now compare Mormon 5:14 with Friedman's description of the Jewish covenant in Deuteronomy. The Davidic covenant therefore became a promise only that the throne was eternally available to David's family. Even if it was unoccupied at the present, there was always the possibility that a descendant of David, a Messiah, might come someday and rule justly. Friedman believes that the author of Deuteronomy came from the kingdom of Israel and was connected with the author of the style that Nephi would have written in, and he summarizes the authors of Deuteronomy. Like those in the Book of Mormon, the authors of Deuteronomy pictured the covenant promise to David to be partially conditional and partially unconditional. The throne of Judah in Jerusalem was unconditional. It was to belong to David's descendants, period. No question about that. And that's forever. But the throne of all Israel was to belong to them only if they were worthy. The Deuteronomy doctrine and the Book of Mormon doctrine on the Davidic covenant are remarkably alike, but in opposition to the J version view of the Davidic covenant. To the kingdom of Judah, the covenant and its associated promises were strictly unconditional. Isn't that remarkable, how the different biases from the southern kingdom and compared to how the northern kingdom look at the covenant match beautifully with the documentary hypothesis, and it's consistently displayed in the Book of Mormon. Now, this idea of the prohibition of idols is interestingly reflected also with this. The E version denounces both graven and molten images, including the graven golden cherubs in the Temple of Jerusalem. The law is found in the Book of Mormon, agrees with the E version. It prohibits both graven and molten images. Mosiah 13, 12, and 13. Look that up and read it. It's so interesting how consistent the Book of Mormon is here with this E version. The Book of Mormon was written with the bias of the Kingdom of Israel authors of that period. Therefore, as the book claims, the authors of the Book of Mormon must have been a product of the faith and the traditions of the Kingdom of Israel. So the sixth test that he brings out is prophecies spoken by the word of Jeremiah. Prophecies spoken by the words of Jeremiah. This detail is so fascinating. Listen to this. At first glance, this is hardly any kind of a test at all. When you stop and think about it, you say, yeah. Every Bible and Torah has the book of Jeremiah. So you say, oh, that doesn't mean anything. Hold on. What's this? The key is that up to a few years ago, it was widely held by scholars that Jeremiah wrote the book of Jeremiah. But he didn't. Today, biblical scholars believe that Baruch is actually, and he was the son of Neriah, Baruch is the one who wrote the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah called Baruch the son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote from the mouth of Jeremiah all the words of the Lord which he had spoken unto him upon a roll of a book. Jeremiah 36:4. So Friedman writes this: we have an explicit portrayal of Jeremiah dictating prophecies to Baruch, who writes them on a scroll. The Book of Mormon is consistent with the biblical evidence in stating that the brass plates contained the prophecies of Jeremiah were not written by his hand, but were, quote, spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah, unquote. 1 Nephi 5:13. So we don't have it written by his hand. We have it spoken by his mouth. And that's how they portray it. That's very, very interesting. Now, the seventh test is the colleague test. Nephi's text suggests that his father was a spiritual colleague of the prophet Jeremiah. That's 1 Nephi 7:14. Well, how can this be confirmed? Where do you look? What do you look for? First, Lehi knew which prophecies Jeremiah was quoting, 1 Nephi 5:13. So how could Lehi have known this unless, of course, he was palling around with Jeremiah? And he certainly heard his sermons. He was one of the many prophets that first chapter talks about, see? Second, it seems that Nephi and his descendants admired Jeremiah, for the prophet is quoted by Book of Mormon prophets more than 500 years after his death in Helaman 8:20. So that's interesting. Even later on in the Book of Mormon, Jeremiah is not forgotten, but his prophecies are further quoted and alluded to. Third, Lehi knew when Jeremiah was cast into prison, 1 Nephi 7:14. Fourth, Lehi's message to the Jews seemed to echo the same thing that Jeremiah was teaching the Jews: repent or be destroyed. The reaction to the Jews to Lehi's message was very similar to their reaction to Jeremiah's message. They sought to kill him. 1 Nephi 1:18-20. Well, because Lehi was from the kingdom of Israel, proponents of documentary hypothesis would reason that he would have the same religious roots as Jeremiah, right? I mean, they say the same things, they have the same approach, they have the same philosophy, and they're treated the same way. So you would think they both came from the same place, right? Some biblical research suggests that Jeremiah's message was the same message delivered by Lehi and his son Nephi. Now, Nephi spoke of Moses as a great heroic figure whose example the people should follow, right? Nephi uses the story of the bronze snake when teaching his brothers, 1 Nephi 17:41. In addition, the Book of Mormon mentions a New World prophet named Samuel. Now, this is a possible hint that the biblical Samuel's name appeared on the brass plates, and that he was also held in high esteem by the descendants of Lehi. According to the documentary hypothesis evidence, these would be direct parallels to what Jeremiah taught. Friedman believes that Jeremiah was a Levite priest from Shiloh in the north, the religious center of the kingdom of Israel. Like Lehi, Jeremiah was probably a descendant of refugees who came from the kingdom of Israel south to Judah before the fall from the Babylonian destruction. They came from their homeland to avoid the Assyrian destruction, I meant the Assyrian destruction. Here's what Friedman writes about Jeremiah. Now, this is so interesting. This is the biblical scholarship here. He's the only prophet to allude to the story of Moses' bronze snake. The story of that snake comes from the E source, the Shiloh northern source. King Hezekiah had smashed the snake. His destruction of an old relic that was associated with Moses himself was probably a blow to the priests of Shiloh, of course. They were the ones who told its story. They held Moses in particular great esteem, and they may have been Moses' descendants. But the J people in Jerusalem destroyed that. He, that is Jeremiah, is also the only prophet to refer to Samuel, the priest, prophet, judge, who was the greatest figure in Shiloh's history. Jeremiah speaks of Samuel alongside Moses as the two great men of the people's history. And the Book of Mormon reflects that. Samuel and Jeremiah. Isn't that fascinating? And Moses. However, the most significant evidence that Lehi and Jeremiah taught the same message is the treatment of the Davidic covenant that they give. We've examined how the Book of Mormon doctrine of the conditional yet unconditional doctrine parallels that of the Book of Deuteronomy. But what does this have to do with Jeremiah and Lehi? According to Friedman, All the evidence suggests that Jeremiah dictated to Baruch the account of Moses that became the book of Deuteronomy.